commanding the Narrative podcast, which I believe is the #1 podcast in the entire universe.
If you could go through life in the Liberal Party without being expelled, you should be ashamed of yourself.
We will decide who comes to this country and the circumstances in which they come.
Socialists don't like ordinary people choosing, or they might not choose socialism.
120 years ago, our country had the world's highest per capita income. What the hell happened?
The answer is mate, because I want to do you slowly. I want to do you slowly.
Ah! We're coming for you, globalist! Ah! Coming for you!
So my name is Tripp. I'm the President of Australians for Better Government. Thank you all for being here. We've got some great speakers today, so we're very excited that you're here to hear from those speakers. I want to start off by thanking you all for being here. It's important that you've given up your Saturday to attend a political event. Not many people are too keen to do so, but you guys seem engaged enough to want to do that, so thank you very much. I also want to thank this wonderful venue and Stevenson for helping us set this up here. This is a great venue. It's nice to see that you guys can have your meetings at such a great place. And also our wonderful speakers that have travelled so far. Dr. Reynolds has come all the way down from the Gold Coast. Katy and McCallum's come down from Kilkeevan in Queensland. So thank you very much for our wonderful speakers today. I'm sure you'll all enjoy them. Now I just quickly want to acknowledge the ABG committee. We're all volunteers. We don't get paid. It's a volunteer organisation. They're all very hard-working people with full-time jobs that give up their valuable free time to contribute to what we're trying to do. So Tony Bowie, who's our secretary, who's at the back there, Martin Longbow, who's our vice president down in South Australia, Lee Evans, who is in the UK actually, and has got a lot of experience in groups like this, so he's been invaluable. Angus Wundership, back to our treasurer. I hope I got your name right, close. Katy McCallum and also Deborah Wilson. Thank you. Now on the agenda today we do have Katy speaking. She's also the president of Let's Rethink Renewables. Martin Stevenson, who is the One Nation representative here, he's going to be speaking, and also Dr. Reynolds at the end. We will be having a Q&A, so what you need to do, if you have a question, please head down to Tony at the back there. There's a notepad, you can write down your question there. We will have an intermission, so that's probably the best time for you guys to write down your questions, and we'll bring all that stuff up during the Q&A. And just quickly, this is being filmed, so it will be broadcast on the Australians for Better Government YouTube page, and also Commanding the Narrative, so you can check out those platforms if you want to rewatch this footage from today. So just a little bit about Australians for Better Government. We are a non-partisan advocacy organisation dedicated to reforming Australia's democratic processes. Through education, public events and policy advocacy, ABG works to promote greater accountability, transparency and genuine representation in government for the benefit of all Australians. We believe that members of Parliament often serve their own ambitions or the will of their political party rather than faithfully representing the interests and concerns of their constituents. No longer can we rely on the politicians to drive real change. So that's why we have Australians for Better Government, to really talk about some things that a lot of other people are not talking about. And ABG is determined to begin the discussion on how we can reform and optimise our system and make change for the better. Now, most importantly, I get asked this a lot, we're not a political party. So if you're a member of another political party, that's fine, you can still support Australians for Better Government. We try to be non-partisan across the political spectrum, which is not always easy, but that's what we are hoping for. So what's our mission at ABG? We want to reform the Constitution. We want to ensure a true separation of powers, which we'll get into a little bit later. We want to educate Australians in civics. That's one of the things that we've really noticed since we set up ABG just over a year ago now, just how much education is needed to teach people about our system of government. We want to be able to empower voters. We want to enshrine our freedoms, and we want to instill pride in Australia. We don't want that black Iron Man view of this country. We have a great country, and it's time to focus on our achievements. So if you want to become a member or donate or contribute in some sort of way, your support really helps us with social media campaigns, hosting events and conferences like this, printing flyers and materials, travelling to events and speaking engagements and billboards and advertising. So any money that comes into the organisation, we put back into our efforts to to advocate for all our proposals. Now, why did we call this We the People? I know people have said, well, that's an American term. Well, it just sounds a lot better than Whereas the People. It wouldn't have the same ring to it. But the message is We the People. The government is meant to be a representative of the people. It's not the government dictating to us. It's the government working for us. And I think we need to get more back to that mentality. So that's enough for me. Let's welcome our first speaker. I first met Katy at the Reckless Renewables Rally at Martin Place in Sydney, and I was talking to someone else. I heard this woman up on stage talking, and I was like, who is that? What a fantastic speaker and advocate. And she's travelled the country, speaking to everyday Australians on how the rollout of renewable energy projects is impacting their lives. She travels a lot, she doesn't ask for any money, she does it all on her own back, and she does it because she loves this country and she takes a lot of pride in this country, and she's fighting for everyday Australians. So she is the president of Let's Rethink Renewables. Please welcome Katy McCallum.
Well, g'day everybody. I'm Katy McCallum, obviously, and I've travelled down from Queensland yesterday with my good friend Shay over here. She's come down with me as well to help out. And I am the president of a group called Let's Rethink Renewables. And that group's sole purpose is to spread the message throughout Australia about the damage that the industrial-sized renewable projects are doing to our nation at the moment. I think you probably would have had to be living under a rock for the last few years if you didn't realise that our country's been chopped up like a piece of paper and having solar panels and wind turbines rolled out everywhere. So Let's Rethink Renewables is not a profit, it's a non-for-profit organisation. It's fully run by volunteers, exactly the same as ABG. And it was born out of some fundraising that myself and a gentleman called Jim Wilmot, who is the Vice Chair of Property Rights Australia, another really good group that everybody should get on board with. And we wanted to have a billboard campaign up in Queensland because we had discovered that the Queensland government-owned corporation Powerlink and Queensland Hydro were coming to Gympie region to pretty much destroy the region. So we raised all this money, nearly $50,000, and we were just going to put some billboards up. I don't know how we raised $50,000. One extremely generous lady gave us $20,000 because she picks one person each year to give a big lump sum to assist with whatever good work that you're doing. Jim happened to know an amazing graphic designer down in Sydney who he'd worked with in a past job, and we got him on board, and suddenly these billboards grew into this giant five-pillar campaign. And what we've done is we have given the images from this campaign to anybody that wants them. So if you drive up the coast of Queensland, you actually get to see a couple of billboards that these are on, where the people have paid for the billboard themselves and they've put our artwork on the billboard. Our dream is that this message gets out to the entire of Australia, that the five pillars, which I'm about to show you, are unrenewable. Once they're gone for good. And we need everybody to understand that, because the government's brainwashing everybody into believing that renewable energy will save the world. Well, I'll tell you what's unrenewable. I'm about to show you right here. Our productive farmlands, our rural landscapes, our wildlife habitats, our strong communities, and this is the one that really hits me the hardest, our way of life. Our way of life here in this country is unrenewable. Once it's gone for good. So I'm not here today because I'm some scientist or a lawyer or an ex-government policy worker from the government, though I was a police officer for 16 years in Queensland, but don't hold that against me, please. What I'm here to tell you about is net zero and the reduced emissions targets that the government is currently rolling out, and the human toll and the community toll that is having throughout Australia. Just a reminder on that, in case you didn't know. So our government has agreed, in accordance with the United Nations requirements, that by the year 2050 we'll be to net zero, and by the year 2035 we would have reduced our emissions 62 to 70% below what they were in 2005. So just think about that for a second, because that's what the government wants us all to do. So how did we get here is probably the most poignant question that everybody asks. How did we get here? When did this happen? Because I'll tell you right now, when I was policing up in Mount Isa 30 years ago, I didn't realise that our government behind our backs was signing us up to United Nations agreements that would control our lives for the next 30 years. So back in the 90s, the United Nations formed the Framework Convention for Climate Change. And out of that grew something that you've probably all heard of, the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement. Did anybody here ever get asked to sign up to the Paris Agreement? No. Or the Kyoto Protocol? Well, those agreements for the last almost 30 years in total, those three things, the framework and the two agreements, they have infiltrated every single aspect of your life, even when you don't even realise, down to the coffee that you're drinking here today. Because everybody's got to be carbon friendly and carbon zero, and there's emissions taxes on everything. Every single aspect of our lives is being dictated by an agreement that was made overseas by the United Nations that our government signed us up to without even asking us. And that's a big issue as far as I'm concerned. So both of those agreements are universally accepted around the world, except the Paris Agreement. And there's one country that has pulled out of that agreement twice. Anybody know who that is? The country? Yep. The Trump administration pulled out of it on their first term, and they pulled out of it the second they got back in for the second term. So clearly you can get out of the agreement. I'm not sure, somebody might know, I'm not sure if there was some sort of adverse effects for them economically, or international trade went down. I doubt it very much. But clearly you can get out of the Paris Agreement. And I remember when I was asked by Barnaby Joyce to first join the National Rational Energy Network a couple of years back, and we had our first meeting. There was just 5 of us and him, and we were talking about it all. And I was scratching my head. I was like, where did this all come from? How do we get in this place? And he said, well, it's the Paris Agreement. I said, well, who signed us up to the Paris Agreement? And he said, well, Tony Abbott. And he started naming all the people who'd assisted to do this stuff. And I said, so why can't we just get out of it? And there was just silence. Because I asked that question, why can't we just get out of it? Why are there no politicians in this country right now who are strong enough to stand up and say, we're going to get out of it? Well, they'd have to be in power, obviously, and I can't see the ones who are in power getting us out of it. But just to explain to you why these policies that the United Nations have directed us to undertake in our nation, why they're affecting you. The other day, one of my mates, who's still a police officer in Queensland, comes and tells me, now I didn't know about this either until I looked into it, comes and tells me that he just bought his wife a new car. So in Queensland, there's a group called RemServe. Do you guys have salary sacrificing in New South Wales? Yeah. So in Queensland, the police, the ambulance, the teachers, the doctors, the nurses, whoever, they can salary sacrifice their mortgage payments, their car leases, your laptop, computer. So I won't say his name. He waltzes into RemServe and he goes to get a new car for his wife just to run around town. He got $16,000 cash back by getting her a BYD EV. An EV. It was going to cost $16,000 more to get the equivalent size car in a petrol-engined Toyota Corolla. So I looked into it. That money's coming from the government. That's your taxpayer funds and mine. Is paying people to drive EVs. I hope nobody here has an EV. Is there any EV owners? So I get EVs turn up at my little shop in Kilkeevan and they find out very quickly what I think about the car they just pulled up in. But not only that, at the end of his 2 years or his 3 years, whichever he picks for his lease period, he has a fixed amount, which we always do, balloon payments, whatever, on leases, but he has a fixed amount far greater than what a Corolla would have got him, or a, Ford Mondeo or whatever Ford's got these days. And who's going to pay the difference in that? Because I've spoken to a couple of dealer principals at some car dealerships and they've traded Teslas in recently and put the people back into Nissan Patrols and Ford Rangers. And those EVs, which were less than 12 months old, the people were trading them in because they were done with them. They'd lost $30,000 on those cars in 12 months. So if our government is paying RemServe to subsidise a person who gets an EV and then they subsidise the loss of the buyback value in a couple of years' time, when are we going to get $50,000 to put towards a car to help us buy a new car. It's absolutely ridiculous, but if you go and look at the federal government's website, it tells you how much money they're giving to the state governments to roll out the EV transition, because they want everybody in an EV. And that scares the bejesus out of me, because I'm not sure if anybody here comes from any further out west, but you cannot function on EVs out west where the food comes from. So I'm going to show you a video now, and some of you might have seen this already because it's done the rounds on the internet quite a bit. So I come from Kilkhaven, and just outside of Kilkhaven, closer to an area called Waluga, about 8 years ago BP turned up. BP Light Source turned up, and nobody really understood what was going on. And they offered all this money to a few farmers on the outskirts of town. It's a brown time of the year when I put the drone up for this, but at the moment this is lush and green, and it's a stunning part of the southeast corner of Queensland. So these people, I don't really think they understood what they were signing up to, but it's like a game of dominoes. Once the first person signs up, the next person realises they have to sell up as well, because you cannot stay when that comes next door to your house. So this is the first half of what's called the Waluga Solar Farm, and the sister to this is sitting out at Wellington here in the western, southwest Arana, we've got it central west Arana. So that's west, this is east. That was once a lush cattle farm with a family. The school bus would pull up to the front gate and the kids would hop on board. This is only one part of it. Now, since I filmed this, there's a giant battery energy storage system that runs all the way along there. There must be about 80 40-foot sized shipping container lithium batteries that have been installed. And shortly, that entire area out there is about to be panels. They've put all the land over here, and that will eventually be panels. And then this is the other half, which is down the road. And when you watch this, if you look out there to the north, as it comes around, you can see the other half, and they will fill all that in. Now, every time I put this up on the internet, on social media, for people to look at, you get these legendary city dwellers, because they clearly don't come from where I come from, and they make comments like, who cares? It's one farm. It's one tiny little bit of land. What a big deal. It's flogged out farmland. Well, first of all, it's not flogged out farmland. Just let me stop that. It's not flogged out farmland. It's prime farmland. It's productive farmland that used to produce beef that went to market to feed the people in the city who choose not to live a rural lifestyle like we do. So, the message I really want to get to everybody is that these projects here, when people say to you it's just one-off, it's not. It's the white-anting theory that's going on here, the white-ant principle. So they are white-anting every community around Australia right now. So for every community that has this going, and we're now facing HV lines, there's a pumped hydro just over the mountains in the next valley, it destroys your community. We've got people selling up and leaving. And it is no different than having a white ant get into your house and start to erode your house frame. It makes it unlivable. And that is what the government, via the United Nations, is doing to our communities. They're making them unlivable. Our communities are unrenewable, and once they're gone, they will never come back again. Once the school bus run stops because there's not as many kids in the local school, once the school starts to slowly wind down because it's slowly losing kids and the education department takes the teachers away, once the local little shop that was the heartbeat of the town shuts its doors because there's no customers anymore, it's taken 150 to 180 years to build that up. And within 5 years of BP turning up, it starts to get white-anted. And that's the thing that I want everybody to understand. This is what they're doing to us. And one of the things that upsets me the most, and this riles me up when I see Chris Bowen on the TV, because he believes there's not a single person in Australia against renewable energy projects. I believe Chris Bowen is a liar, because he has not come to any of these places. He's not met with the thousands of action groups all over Australia, from South Australia right to the top of Queensland, all the way down to Tasmania, and everywhere in between are fighting these projects. He says that we all want them, that everybody's pro-renewables. But what really gets on my goat, all those years that I was a police officer, our biggest job was DV. And when I tell you this, I don't want to take away from the importance of DV and how serious it is. It's probably one of the most serious things that we're facing right now. But we had it drummed into our head every single day what the definitions of DV were, and when you turned up a job you had to look for those characteristics of what was going on. You know, acts of or threats of violence, willful damage, intimidation, financial coercion, bullying, gaslighting, all of those terrible behaviour, those character traits and behaviours that should not exist. So we're told to police those character traits in a person and that you cannot do it. Yet our government themselves and the international companies that they've rolled the red carpet out to are turning up here and doing those exact things to people out in country towns. And it's going on, it's absolutely going on. I could write a book bigger than Dr. Reynolds' big book over there with the stories. And I've seen the people, I've had them in my shop in tears, grown men who have, here's one in particular, had come from South Africa. They had had their farm taken off them and they were starting over here in Australia. They bought a beautiful property just outside Kilkeven. Next minute, Powerlink's knocking on their door to tell them, we're resuming your property and we'll give you the market value of the land, and that's about it. He did not know where to go, what to do. So he came into the shop in tears. He's an engineer in the mines out at Emerald. It's absolutely horrific to think that our government would allow citizens of this country to be treated that way. It's disgusting. It's just disgusting. So that leads me to what we're all here to talk about today. So how we, the people, are going to make a difference and how we can fix this. Because what I truly believe is that the only way to stop this, well, obviously it's political. We need to get the right people into power who are going to get us out of the Paris Agreement and who are going to drop the reduction in emissions targets, drop the net zero policies. We need to get rid of those things. But we also need to ensure that people like Chris Bowen don't get picked to be the environment and, the climate change and energy minister anymore. So Chris Bowen, who has a degree in economics and a master's degree in international relations and can speak fluent Indonesian, he's in charge of the foundational ministerial profile that allows you to exist. Water, land, air, energy. He's in charge. Would it not be more appropriate that somebody like Ian Plimer or Professor Stephen Wilson or Dr. Peter Ritt would be in charge of that ministerial profile? Somebody who's got experience in electrical engineering, in earth sciences, geology, physics, environmental science. So we've got this problem where we've got ministers who just get given the job. They get handed the reins and they don't know how to ride the horse. We need to put the jockey in the seat who knows how to ride the horse, and that is not Chris Bowen. Because I doubt very much that he's ever stepped foot outside of the city, and if he has, most likely for a photo opportunity in a place where he went recently where the people looked like they had been put there as actors as well, which I find a little bit sad. And to go further from that, does everybody read the Constitution by any chance? Have their little copy? Section 51 appears to me, and I'd like to open this up to everybody to talk to about this after the meeting. From what I can tell, the federal government has no constitutional powers to dictate to the states what to do with their electricity grid or how we produce energy. So up until that United Nations framework came in the 1990s, the states of Australia looked after their own grids. They looked after their own energy supply and they did their own thing in their state to suit their people. So we've gone from that to an integrated system plan that allows us to blow power stations up. What civilised society blows up a piece of infrastructure that could be used? But we did, of course we did, because we're going to be at net zero soon. So, Section 51 gives some really loose powers, some very vague powers that if the federal government wants to, they can... Sorry, I'm talking too much. I have to wind it up. They can tell the states what to do. I believe it's time that the states took back their energy sovereignty from Chris Bowen and Anthony Albanese and told them that we're going to work out how to supply the energy in our own state for our people. Because at the moment, we've got that jockey on the horse's back. He doesn't even know how to ride the horse. and he's telling us what to do. So I'd like you all to think about that, because it's something that I think about a lot. I'm not a constitutional expert by far, but if anybody's got any ideas on that, I think it'd be a great thing for us to talk more about. Why is the federal government telling us how our energy grid should be made up? All done. Thank you.
So our next speaker, you should all know him. He's a local business owner, and I'm led to believe you'll probably see his trucks driving around with his nice face on it and the One Nation logo. And I'm interested to hear about his views on small business as well, because that's one thing that doesn't get talked about anymore, is small business. The government used to talk about that a lot, you don't hear about it anymore. And he's also a former One Nation candidate at a federal and state level, and a very successful one at that. So please welcome Martin Stevenson.
Thanks, Stephen. I've just got a few notes here that point me in the right direction. I sat down this morning just to write some notes, and at the end of the day, when you think about it, it's pretty sad that we're in a room here asking Australians for better government. 50 years ago, you wouldn't have thought you'd have to do that, because we had a decent government that weren't selling us out. Now imagine the Anzacs that fought and died for this country and the people still serving. They'd be turning in their graves, because really this organisation shouldn't have to exist. We should be comfortable with our government, but we can't be, because they traded us, pretty much traded us to the country. About 10 years ago is when I really got involved with politics, because I just thought something wasn't right, and I joined Australian Conservatives with Corey Bernardi, as a lot of you might know, and then when he packed up his bags after, I think it was the state election in 19, I didn't know what to do, but I knew you had to keep going, and One Nation was the obvious choice, which is where I went, because they're the only party that's been true to Australia First relentlessly for 30 years. She's never wavered, unlike the uni party that seemed to just go with whatever they're told to go with. So that's why I ended up there, and now the masses are starting to wake up to the 50 years of managed decline under Labor and Liberal that the country's seen. We've gone downhill at the moment. It used to be a slow decline, now it's like we've fallen off a cliff. And One Nation, the people are now seeing that really the only genuine option to stop that is One Nation. While there's other good parties, they don't have the support that One Nation has picked up in the last 6 months, which has been exponential, from going from slowly around 5% to the numbers they're seeing now. And it's only on the back of consistency and Australia First people are realising we're in trouble, we've got to get out of this. So, it's hard to see. So, and you can see the uni party, how they work, because the seemingly conservative Matt Canavan and Angus Taylor get given a job to lead their parties, and then the first thing they do is attack One Nation. Yeah, the week before they were agreeing on the same things. So they're obviously doing what they're told by their masters, which is not what we need. We need people in government to look after Australia and the best interests of we the people, as it says. So it's not working out too well for the uni party, because now people are really changing in droves. Like I watched Arby in Melbourne with Arby Yemeni with Pauline walking around the streets, and there was hardly a person didn't want their photo with her or stop and say thank you for what you're doing. Whereas, and when we started here 5 years ago, people would sort of call you a racist and really give you a hard time, whereas now they stop and shake your hand and say good on you, thanks. So things have changed, and it's good to see. So it's just it's just so bad what they're doing. And to me, you know, some of the things you look at is like the guillotining of legislation through Parliament. Like Kate said, we never get asked anything. You know, they'll guillotine things through without asking us what we want. And then the one time they do ask us what we want, like The Voice, we don't tell them what they want to hear. We actually vote against their thing, so they're still trying to backdoor it somehow. But, you know, they thought they could ram it through with all of their money and all of the Hollywood and crap they went through to try and push it. And then we still didn't want to do it. So they sort of really are on a hiding to nothing at the moment. The people are awake to them. And we need to keep sort of really pushing it along and giving them an alternate option. And many things like COVID, that was probably one of the biggest eye-openers for people when they declared the pandemic and the mandate of the jabs and locked us down. And every one of us were thinking, how can they do that? You know, we've got the constitutional rights and our human rights. And then you find out that in the years preceding that, they just changed little laws and meanings of words and things that allowed them to do it all. Never asked us if we wanted to change the legislation. And it was just, so it's all planned and by design to control us. You know, nearly every law they pass now, they tell you it's for your safety, for the safety of the people. But the reality is it's for their control of we the people. You know, we want to be free. Most people just want to live their life, be left to their own devices, make their own decisions, and pretty much be left alone by the government. And government just provides the necessary infrastructure for us to live a happy, peaceful, productive life. And we're so governed now, it's ridiculous. A mate of mine went over to Greece recently, and him and his family were in the car driving around, and a bloke pulls up next to him on a little Vespa, I think he said it was. He was sitting on there, he had his dog on the front handlebars, his wife and his kid behind him. They were having bags of shopping, and he was smoking a cigarette, not one of them had a helmet. And he was horrified. He thought, they're on there, they haven't got helmets, they're this, but they're all smiling and happy. And then he thought about it, and he thought, they're making their own decisions, they're happy. Over here, you get caught without a helmet, you'll be marched off. So, I mean, that's how far our freedoms have been eroded away. We can't make the simplest decisions for ourselves. On my first holiday as an 18-year-old, we all got in a car and drove to Queensland. We had to take it in turns in the back of a ute. Like, now you'd be arrested. Because back then our parents said, see you when you get back. And didn't care that there was two of us in the back. Police pull you over, well, you know you were speeding. Nothing was said about the people in the back. So that's how far our freedoms have been eroded away without us even realising it. Everything's for our safety. But sometimes feeling free, I think, is more important than being under the thumb to pretend that they're looking after our safety. Because there's a fine line between actually being free and being safe, and I think we need to be able to make that decision for ourselves. And the government need to actually get out of our way and let us live our lives in how we see fit. And we need to be prepared to take our own choices and stand by it. Unfortunately, too many people these days want to blame someone for everything, and that doesn't help the situation. And the Uni Party, I think, have underestimated the people. We're now people en masse are waking up, so I think they have underestimated how angry people are. And it takes like things like the Bondi terrorist attack, like arresting Ben Robert Smith, machete attacks and home invasions that are going on by the people that are important into the joint. The people have had enough, and it's just to a point now that we're sick of being told that we as law-abiding citizens who are proud of Australia are the problem in this country. We're not. We just want a safe, peaceful country to live in, and the way it's being run is actually eroding that every corner you turn. There are important people into this country that don't value our society and way of life and want to bring their hatred and other things with them. We can't have that. We've just got to stand up, and now I think it's the perfect storm. We're at a point now where so many things have gone south and people can't avoid seeing it and recognising how bad things have gone. Because I think over time people had blinkers on. As long as it didn't affect their little daily life, they could just carry on, and what was going on over there to the sides didn't matter. But now it's here. There's everything you do every day, you're paying for it at the checkouts, or the speed cameras. Like a free society, you can't turn a corner without a speed camera. Picks you up doing 2 over the limit. It's everything we do. We're controlled. They're putting cameras up more and more. Like I don't know. There's so many cameras around now. They can nearly track you from your front door to wherever you end up. Yeah, so it's, and none of this we've asked for. It's all been put on us for our safety. So we need to take back our freedoms and take out responsibility for ourselves and not rely on the government for our safety, because most of us don't need it. We're all intelligent people and can make a decision that we can live with. It's very hard to live with government decisions that they force onto us. So, and that's sort of how I've ended up here, because my dad had a saying, don't whinge about it, do something about it, and that's sort of why I ended up here, because someone's got to do it, so I just had that in the back of my head. Do it, don't whinge about it. So it's up to everyone here and all around Australia that are starting to see the problems to actually stand up and make a difference. We can't just expect someone else to do it. So as uncomfortable as it is at times, it gets easier the more you do it. And the more you do it, people realise you're in it for the right reasons, and we can make a difference. As you can see now, One Nation's 6 months ago we had a meeting after the election, and I was talking about possibly in 3 elections being able to form government. But with all the rubbish that's gone on, as I said, with Ben Robert Smith and the Bondi thing, it could actually, could actually be the next election that One Nation's in a position to take power, which was unheard of 6 months ago. Would have been a pipe dream. So the people are really waking up, and hopefully the Farrer by-election will show. And even today down in Victoria, there's an election today. I forget the seat. That's Nepean. So hopefully the result there is just as good as Farrer, and they can win at least one of them, possibly 2. And then the major parties will realise the people have had enough. But we actually need to get rid of them, because it doesn't matter what they say, they never do what they say. They'll come in and say what you want to hear, and then once they're in power, well, they'll forget about that and just carry on doing what their masters tell them. Their masters should be us, we the people. So we need to make sure that the people in government actually do what we the people want, and that's only going to happen if we can get rid of the uni party. So hopefully we'll see it in the next 1 or 2 elections, and we can be thankful that our kids and grandkids have actually got a chance, and they're not going to be overrun by the globalists, because that's where we're headed if we don't stop it. So hopefully we can all do our bit and we can sit back and watch one nation take government. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. I think that's what they intended when they wrote the Constitution. They wanted to see everyday people like Martin stand for Parliament, not the political staffers and union hacks that we get now. So thank you again, Martin. Now, you're going to have to put up with me for a little bit now, because I'm going to let you know a little bit about Australians for Better Government. And just a little bit about me. I am the President of Australians for Better Government. I'm also the Vice President of Let's Rethink Renewables. I'm a National Committee member of the Campaign for an Independent Britain, which is Britain's longest serving group dedicated to independence. And I'm also host of the Commanding the Narrative podcast, which we'll be filming this and airing this on there. Okay, so we started Australians for Better Government in the beginning of 2025, so we're still in our infancy. And I'm going to be talking and expanding on some of our proposals today. But if you want to find out more about us, you can head to australiansforbetter.com. It's got all our proposals and information up there. Now, I'm going to ask you guys the question, why should we want better government? Anyone want to contribute? We need it. We need it. We're desperate. So, if we study history, we see the results of bad government. We see authoritarian systems and how they impact people's lives. That's why we should always strive for better government. Now, what are some of the benefits of better government? So, for the country, we should all want a strong, prosperous, safe and free country. A country that is provided all the opportunities to achieve its potential. And this country has a lot of potential, but we just haven't come close yet, in my belief. We should also want a government that should protect our culture. It should celebrate and foster it. It should protect it. And it should not make us feel guilty for our culture. Good government should also protect the individual. It should protect individual freedoms, thoughts and expressions. Individuals should be given opportunities to succeed. And lastly, and above all else, good government should encourage and protect families. Families are the backbone of our society. We want strong, prosperous and free families. We want a strong country that we can leave behind for our children and our grandchildren. So it begs the question, what is government? What is it really? At the end of the day, it's just words on a piece of paper. Our constitution and any legislation that they put through, if the people don't agree with it, it doesn't mean anything. Now, it is enforced by force, the military, but if enough people rise up and disagree with the system, you get this. Revolution. Now, before you all get too excited, I'm not talking about a kinetic revolution or hot revolution. I'm talking about a revolution in thinking. We need a revolution in thinking in this country, and that's what Australians for Better Government hopes to achieve, to at least start the conversation on our system of government and the type of government that we want. So I'm going to ask you another question. Do you feel adequately represented by your politicians? Anyone say yes? That's crickets. Are our elected representatives adequately representing your interests and the interests of the nation? If you speak to anyone in Canberra, they'll tell you that they've just got lobbyists swirling around them. And it seems that that's where the interest lies. That there's face-to-face with the lobbyists too much and not face-to-face with the Australian people enough. So let's talk about ways of getting Australian people more involved in our system. Now, this is a ballot paper from Alabama in the US. And as you can see there, this is for the presidential election. So it's not just voting for the president or the vice president. They actually vote on a whole host of issues. They vote for their congressional representative. the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, several judges, heads of departments, and they even have constitutional amendments that they throw in. Why can't we do the same? Why do we already have ballot papers that are long enough. If we expand it a little bit, is it really going to hurt us? But it gives us an opportunity to have more of a say in government. So let's learn from other countries. So what are some examples that we probably need more of a say in? How about immigration?
Yes.
When have everyday Australians been asked whether they support immigration and the levels of immigration? Now, I think the majority of Australians may support a certain level of immigration, but that should be set by the Australian people. So why can't, at election time, we have one of those ballots and people can vote what they feel is the adequate level of immigration? And if the government exceeds that level of immigration, then there's a double dissolution. So there's accountability built into the system that the politicians have to do the will of us, the people. Another issue, treaties, international treaties. These politicians are signing up to international treaties all the time. When are we asked about it?
Never.
Katy mentioned the Paris Agreement. When were we asked about that? When were the Australian people asked whether or not we should be a member of the United Nations or the World Economic Forum or the WHO? Now, if you put that to a vote, the Australian people might say, yes, we want to be a member to the United Nations, but let's put it to a vote. And if the Australian people say no, then we leave. But it should be up to the people. State of emergencies. We saw this during COVID. State governments could take away our freedoms under the guise of public health orders and state of emergencies. But when were we ever asked about that? When were we asked whether the response to COVID was adequate or acceptable? When did the people of each state cede their power to governments and their premiers and to public health officials? So we should be asked about that sort of stuff. Now, this is something that ABG is going to do a lot of work on, hopefully in the next weeks, months and years, and that's taxation. Now, you can see there, this is the way that our taxes are being spent. When are the Australian people asked if they're happy with their tax dollars going to these areas? Are you happy with your tax dollars going to health? I mean, let's do a show of, maybe we can do a little test. Who would like to see their tax dollars going to health? Okay. What about defence?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay. Education?
Yes.
Okay. Welfare? Not so much? Some people? Okay. What about foreign aid?
No.
Okay. So, when have you ever been asked that question? Never. This is a big one. Government spending. The Australian people should be setting the adequate debt ceiling. We should be setting that ceiling of debt. And if the governments exceed it, bang, double dissolution. Bang, accountability built into the system. If they want to spend too much money, if they spend more money than we allow, then governments dissolve. There's a lot of ideas. And this is what we're all about, starting that debate. Let's talk about that. Let's put some pressure back on the politicians. They're getting away with this. We want to put pressure back on them, and we can only do it by we the people. The governments must seek an approval from the Australian people to exceed that debt ceiling. And as I said, if they exceed it, then they go to an election. So what is the solution? I just maybe gave you some ideas there, but we need to improve the performance of government to deliver better outcomes for the future of all Australians, all of us. But what are the steps to achieve better government? So one of the things I like to focus on is the separation of powers, and this is a big focus of Australians for Better Government. Does anyone know what the separation of powers is?
Yes.
Yes? Oh, good. Okay. So just to make it clear for everyone, our government is meant to be separated into three separate branches that are meant to be independent from each other. The first one is the legislature. Now that's the House of Representatives, the Green House, and the Senate, the Red House. Now a lot of people think that that's the separation of powers. No, that's one branch of government. That's where the government sits and the opposition. The next branch is the executive. Now a lot of people don't really understand this all that much, but that's where the ministers are. So they put that law that's passed through Parliament, they put that into action. And the last branch is the judiciary. They have the power to make judgments of the law. So that's your courts. So that's the three branches. And they're meant to be separate and work, I guess, against each other or in conflict with each other to have some accountability there. So let's look at the executive branch in a little bit more detail, because I think that's the one that really needs a lot of focus. So if we read section 61, it says the executive power of the Commonwealth is vested in the Queen and is exercisable by the Governor-General as the Queen's representative, and extends to the execution and maintenance of this Constitution and of the laws of the Commonwealth. So what that's really saying is that the Governor-General is meant to be the head of the executive and separate to the legislature. What happens now is that the Prime Minister and the government of the day select the Governor-General. So this is our current Prime Minister and current Governor-General, Sam Mostyn. Sam Mostyn, selected. Should the Governor-General be selected or elected? Elected. Australians for Better Government say we should be electing our Governor-General. And then that Governor-General could be separate from the government and hold the government to account, and the government can hold the Governor-General to account. So that's really how the separation of powers is meant to work. And I'm sure Dr. Reynolds will go into that in a lot more detail as we go along, because you want all those branches separate. Now, I'm going to ask you this question for all those people that have read the Constitution. These are our former Prime Ministers, our illustrious Prime Ministers. How many times is the office of Prime Minister mentioned in the Constitution? Zero. It's not mentioned. So how do we suddenly have this office of Prime Minister that is head of the government in the lower house, tells his party what to do in the Senate, selects the Governor-General, selects a lot of the judges to courts? How did this person, this role, get so much power in our system when it's not even mentioned in our Constitution? Now, a lot of people may say it's sensible to have a Prime Minister. Okay, well, that's fine. Let's put that into the Constitution. But let's have that discussion. Let's set the roles and responsibilities of the Prime Minister. If we want to be a serious country, then we need a serious Constitution and we need a serious system. Meanwhile, this is the amount of times that the Governor-General is mentioned in our Constitution. So you can see that when our Constitution was originally written, and again, Dr. Reynolds hopefully will expand upon this when he speaks before, a lot of the power is meant to be vested in the Governor-General. Okay, who remembers this guy? So we're talking about the power of the Prime Minister now. So we've made the point that the Prime Minister is not mentioned in the Constitution. Yet when Scott Morrison was Prime Minister during COVID, he appointed himself to the Ministry of Health, Finance, Treasury, Home Affairs, Industry, Science, Energy and Resources, and he was considering appointing himself to Agriculture, Water and the Environment. There's no mechanism to stop him from doing that. So what mechanism is there to stop a Prime Minister from assuming all ministries? Now, the Albanese government has addressed this through legislation, but I think this needs to be addressed in our Constitution. So we need to start, again, we need to have these conversations of whether or not this is acceptable. Now, in a little bit more detail, we're going to go back to Chapter 2, which is the executive, and we're going to focus on ministers now. Now, Section 64 says the Governor-General may appoint officers to administer such departments of state of the Commonwealth as the Governor-General and Council may establish. Such officers shall hold office during the pleasure of the Executive Council and shall be the Queen's Ministers of State of the Commonwealth. So, in everyday terms, that's saying that the Governor-General is to be selecting the ministers. So, Minister of Health, Minister of Climate Change and Energy, what have you. Currently, the Prime Minister and the government is selecting our ministers. So again, where's the true separation? So under this line, if you might think, okay, well, that's acceptable. Under this line, there's this next line. And I believe that this one line completely ruins our system of government. It's the ministers to sit in Parliament line. And it says, After the first general election, no Minister of State shall hold office for a longer period than 3 months unless he is or becomes a senator or member of the House of Representatives. So what that is saying, it's dictating that all ministers are to sit in the Parliament. So again, it's blurring the lines between the two branches. So let's look. Well, what that does, it means that if we are to select ministers, now we have to select ministers out of the suboptimal lot of parliamentarians sitting in the Parliament, which are often political staffers and union hacks, lawyers, that sort of thing. They haven't rarely worked in the real world or worked in the industries that they're now ministers of. So let's look at some real life examples. This is the Defence Minister, Richard Marles. Does everyone know Richard Marles? So he's Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Defence. He was elected to the House of Representatives in 2007. He held previous ministries, so he hasn't just been Defence Minister. He was raised in Geelong and studied law and science. He's a devoted Geelong Cats supporter, golf fanatic, keen photographer, and a snow dome collector. So he collects snow domes, but as John Ruddick said at one of our previous events, this bloke probably doesn't even know how to fire a gun, and he's our Defence Minister. Where's his role in defence? Now, this is what his bio on his ministerial page doesn't tell you. He joined the Melbourne University Labor Club in his first week at university. He served as president of the Melbourne University Student Union in 1988. He was General Secretary of the National Union of Students in 1989. He started his career as a solicitor with Melbourne industrial law firm Slater & Gordon. In 1994, he became a legal officer for the Transport Workers Union, and was elected their National Assistant Secretary 4 years later. And in 2000, he joined Australia's peak national union body, the Australian Council of Trade Unions, as Assistant Secretary, remaining in the position until he was elected in 2007. So based on that, he should be the Minister for Unions, not the Minister for Defence. So what could be some better options if we were to remove that line in the Constitution? How about Peter Cosgrove? Born in 1947 as the son of a soldier, graduated from the military college in Duntroon, fought in Vietnam, so we do know he knows how to fire a gun. He commanded a rifle platoon. He was awarded the Military Cross. He was the commander of Interfed in East Timor. He was promoted to Lieutenant General and was appointed Chief of the Army in 2000. After a further promotion to General, he was appointed Chief of the Defence Force from 2002 to 2005. So his whole career has been in the military. He knows how the military works and where all the bodies are buried and how to improve, hopefully, how to improve the military. Now, he might be past and he might be too old. This is just an example of the type of calibre that we could have as a Minister of Government if we were to delete that ministers to sit in Parliament line and the Governor-General was able to pick ministers from the broader Australian population. You could have someone with industry experience now being a minister. So I'm going to put the question to all of you. Who would you prefer as Minister of Defence? Peter Cosgrove or Richard Marles?
Ben Roberts-Smith.
Well, if you were to remove the ministers to sit in Parliament line, that could happen. So that's what we're saying. We want to put it to a referendum and ask the Australian people whether or not we want to put a big red line through that line in the Constitution, and hopefully bring in better quality ministers to hopefully run better departments and get better outcomes for everyday Australians. Now, this is the current Albanese cabinet. I'm not picking on Labor, but they're in power, so this is the situation. Let's analyse some of them. Chris Bowen, sorry. Born in 1973, elected to Fairfield City Council in 1995, and he left in 2004. Elected to Parliament in 2007. Where's his experience in the energy sector?
Fairfield Council.
Katy Gallagher. Sorry, Katy. We should have you in there. Katy Gallagher. Studied political science and sociology, worked as a social worker. Later, she held an administrative job at the Community and Public Sector Union. And then she was elected to the ACT Parliament in 2001 before entering federal politics, so she's been in the same sort of system. Has she worked in a bank, at least? She's finance minister, that's an important ministry.
I was the treasurer at the party 5 months, perhaps I could.
Well, you probably do. So this guy, the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese. So we all know that he grew up in public housing with a single mum. You all know that? He also studied economics at Sydney University, okay, but he never applied it. During his time in student politics, Albanese led a group within Young Labor that was aligned to the hard left faction, which maintained links to broader left-wing groups such as the Communist Party of Australia, the People for Nuclear Disarmament, and the African National Congress, or the ANC. As a student, he joined the Labor Party and later worked as a party official and research officer before entering Parliament in 1996, and he's been there ever since. So what does he know about the everyday pressures that we're all under? Paying a mortgage, getting up at 5 a.m. in the morning, going off to work, working weekends, raising a family. What does he know about that when he sat in Parliament since 1996? So, what are some better options than that lot? Surely anyone. Right. So let's recap. Hopefully you've got some of our proposals in your mind. What does Australian... So we go, what do we stand for? What do we want? We want to elect the Governor-General. We want to ensure there's a true separation of powers between the 3 branches of government. We want to delete the ministers to sit in Parliament line in Section 64, so the Governor-General can then select ministers based on their industry experience. And we want to allow the Governor-General then to select those appropriate ministers. Now, some of the other proposals that I won't be able to talk about today because I won't have the time, you can find this all on our website, is that where possible, we want to reduce the influence of political parties.
Yes.
Now, one of our proposals is to reform the Senate by banning any political affiliation into a political party or political group. Our Senate is meant to be the House of Review. Now, I understand why you have political parties in the House of Representatives. You need to form government. I get that. I think that's sensible. But in the Senate, in the upper house, senators should be judging legislation that comes through based on the merits of that legislation, not where their political alliance lays with their political party. So we want to completely abolish that. That also applies for state upper houses and also councils. Yeah. And it also applies to the Governor-General. We don't want the Governor-General to be part of a political party either. We want to reintroduce the Legislative Council in Queensland. So if you don't know, Queensland doesn't even have an upper house. Let's bring it back. We want to enshrine freedoms in the Constitution. We want to introduce citizens-initiated referenda. And we want to educate Australians, especially our youth, in civics, so they understand our system. So what's the next step for ABG? Firstly, we want you to join us. The more members that we have, the more resources we have, and the more pressure we can put on the politicians. If we can walk into Parliament and say, look at all the members we've got, they're more likely to listen to us. So please consider joining us. We want to lobby the parliamentarians, put pressure on them so they can start thinking about our proposals. We want to hold more events and forums like this to get people thinking, to start the discussion. We want to hold rallies where appropriate. We want to educate, again, Australians in civics, and we want to get active. Because this stuff doesn't get talked about. We feel as though we're the group in Australia that talks about these issues, not policy stuff, not political party stuff, but the fundamental structure of our government. That's what Australians for Better Government is focused on. So I want to go back to the question that I started in the beginning. What is government? It's meant to be us, the people, and we get a say on the direction of our government. It's not just dictated to us. Now, the naysayers may come up and say, well, this group, they don't understand the Constitution, they don't really understand our system, and they'll try and discredit us at every turn. But I always go back to the fundamental point. What is government? At the end of the day, it's what the people believe in, it's what the people accept. So it's us, the people, that determine how our system is meant to be. So please head to our website, australiansforbetter.com. and you'll see all our proposals there. You can sign up to be a member. And that's it from me, so thank you very much. What we're going to do now is we're going to break for an intermission, and we'll come back with our final speaker and then our Q&A. So thank you. Okay, everyone. Hopefully you're all refreshed and you're thinking about some of the things we've already discussed. I just quickly want to introduce Gerald Mattinson. He's going to say a few words about an upcoming event he's got, so please welcome Gerald.
Thank you, everybody. Most of you know me from the Central Coast Regional Committee, but some of you don't. What I've done with two other people, Matt and my wife, Wanda, I've started a non-partisan association called Central Coast Conservative Alliance. And the purpose of this is to, not under any party umbrella, but to bring speakers into Central Coast. So people can come and listen to various things, various topics without feeling that they are being pressured into any one party, Conservative Party. So we've started this, and to get this going, I'm putting on a dinner dance. It's called the Central Coast Community Dinner Dance. It's on the 1st of August, and it's going to be held at Mingara. I'll have live music there. I've got speakers coming, people who have agreed to come. We have Stephen has agreed to come and to speak for a short time and mingle with the guests. And then we've got Stuart Bonds is coming, Craig Kelly. I've got Lyle Shelton from the Family First Party. I've got Gemma Nawasi from the Libertarians, and Gerard Renick will be coming down too. So they'll all be speaking briefly on the night and then be able to mingle with all the participants. I've booked the ballroom to hope to get 350 people there, so please sign up and come along. I like to see people signing up early so I get a feel of what it's like, because if you don't reach a certain number, then I'll have to cancel it, because I can't cover the costs out of my own pocket myself for the night. So please sign in as early as possible. I've got invitations here which I prepared this morning. It's only just been released today. So please get an invitation from me and sign up. I've also started under this umbrella what is called Conservative Young Australians. I was going to do it under Young Nation last year, but that's been put on hold and put on hold and put on hold, and I can't wait any longer to get out to meet and talk to the younger people. So I've started Conservative Young Australians. Adam Graham over here is going to be a lead in it, and so we'll talk to him later about it. And but we're going to be trying to get something started by the 15th of May and then move forward. I've spoken to two other people about this, and Newcastle is eager to come on board, and so is New England. So in the last week, I've got two other regions wanted to come in on this as well. So it's growing. So thank you for your time, and please think about coming to this dinner dance. And Peter Healy Band, you can look him up, he's a great musician.
Righto, it's time for the main event. He's come all the way down the Gold Coast. He always tells me that he has to go on last because he's the best speaker and he's going to give you all guys a good feeling about the country and our history. He has a PhD in constitutional law, so he knows what he's talking about, and he's the only Australian to have worked in the US Congress. And he's got a lot of good contacts and former, what are some of them? Mitch McConnell and Teddy Kennedy.
Teddy Kennedy, Joe Biden and Mitch McConnell, and Dan Coates, who became head of everything in space. I
don't know if you'd say Joe Biden too loudly. So I don't know if you'd say Joe Biden too loudly.
Well, I work with him, so I know when people go on about American politics.
Well, there you go. So we've got a true expert. He's also worked in the Australian system, and now he's become a notable Australian historian with his fabulous book, What a Capital Idea, Australia 1770 to 1901. So let's bring him to the stage, Dr. Christopher Reynolds.
It was 1785, and the French were preparing for war. again. They wanted a slice of the Asian trade and had sent Count de la Perouse into the Pacific to scout around for a possible French site for a settlement. The British East India Company, the largest company in the world, their directors were worried. They contacted Prime Minister William Pitt. Pitt must act. But what plan could Prime Minister Pitt come up with that the Parliament would accept? And what plan did he come up with in secret? And there was one. Do you like a good story? Well, this book is full of them. This book is full of them. I'll tell you a bit about it. It started out as a children's book. And once I did the research, you can see I got a bit carried away with it. And you're lucky because this is the abridged version. But a friend of mine called me and he said, I've been contacted by a big publisher and they're interested in a children's book for primary school on Australian history. And I said, well, you know, how are you going to do that? I said, well, how old are the children? And he said, oh, about 11. And I said, well, how long does this course run for? And he said, oh, it's only one semester, so I suppose that'll be about 9 or 10 classes. I said, you want someone to write Australian history for 11-year-olds that only runs for 9 weeks? I said, well, you know, I mean, how on earth are you going to do? Are we going to do a comedy book, or Wacky Warriors or something? I said to him. I said, well, the research. I said, let me get back into the research, and when I sort it out a bit, I'll get back to you. And as I said, I got a bit carried away with the research. And it happened that I thought, well, I better get an idea of what everybody's writing about. So I got a dozen history books, Australian history books, and I put them out on the floor. And as I started to look at them, I soon realised how boring they all were. I mean, it was all this yellowing paper, little books with print you could hardly read. And if I came across a fact, I'd be looking back 5 pages to try and find a date that matched the fact. And then some of them actually had pictures in the middle. You know, you think, oh, that's nice, in black and white. But the pictures look good, but what did it relate to? You know, have you done that sort of thing? You wonder what on earth I'm doing with this book. And then I sort of looked at, you know, who was writing this stuff. And I discovered that he was an author that was up to his 5th edition of something he'd written in 1960. So he hadn't done any more research. He hadn't improved his work. His publisher was just researching the same old stuff. Then I discovered that there was another habit that these particular authors had, and that is that author A would say, well, I know that this is true because I'm quoting author B. And then when I look up author B, he was quoting author C. And this is true because author C said it. And then when I looked up author C, well, he was back quoting author A. So I thought, well, you know, what's going on with these people who call themselves academics? And I decided that it was sort of like the story was sort of getting mixed a bit, and it was sort of like the Santa Claus syndrome. And that is, if you tell yourself the same stuff often enough, you start to believe it. And that's what was happening. And then as I started to read this stuff that was already sort of getting me, you know, shifting in the seat with the way they were writing, was that these people who called themselves historians really wanted to be novelists. And they would just make things up. And they just extend it, you know. But the thing that got me going was that he was a fellow from Melbourne by the name of Manning Clark. And I'd been given Manning Clark's 6 volumes of his books on my 40th birthday as a present, which is just 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years ago now, when I got this great gift. And I've read it twice. I'd gone through the book twice. But now I was coming at it with a completely different eye. I was looking, for where the facts were and what was really being said. But this is the thing that Manning Clark is writing about MacArthur, the sheep man. Maybe you heard about MacArthur. And he says about MacArthur, as he lifted the Shiraz to his lips, he stretched back in his chair and rested his feet on the banister of his veranda. And as he watched the sun setting over the sunset, he pondered the price of wool on the London stock market. And I thought, oh, yuck. I mean, what was that? I mean, how incredible is that? MacArthur was banned from being in Australia so often and for so long, he must have been only home for a long weekend. He didn't grow a Shiraz out there on the Cumberland Plain, but a pretty rough old claret. His house faced east, and he couldn't have seen the sunset. And for all Manning Clark knew, it probably rained that day. I mean, what am I reading here? Now, here comes the research on this. When I actually got hold of the letter from Lord Glenelg to Governor Darling, telling and giving permission for 12 Germans to get into Australia, Lord Glenelg is really quite angry about this, that the MacArthurs have kept coming, and he said no and no, and they're back again. So Governor Darling has said, please let them have these Germans. And in this letter, the anger is there. So I won't swear, but he did. And he basically says, if you think I'm going to let these foreigners come into Australia, New South Wales, you are wrong. Point, it was never, ever a European settlement. It was always and only a British settlement. If you think I'm going to let these 12 Germans, these 12 foreigners come into Australia, you're wrong. And don't you go telling anybody else that I'm going to give out and allow people to come who aren't British. So I will give these 12 Germans visas for just 5 years, and then they're to leave the country. Now, here was the interesting thing in that letter. It was written not about or to John MacArthur. It was written to Major Edward MacArthur, his son, because the date of that letter giving permission for the Germans to come out to Australia to grow wine, John had been dead for 5 years. So how on earth does Manning Clark write about John MacArthur watching the sunset and drinking his clay? He hadn't even worked out that the man had been dead before they even got permission to grow grapes. So I was getting angry with what I was reading. And then I came across Keneally. Now, Keneally writes a great story, and that then became the problem. He was making it up as he was writing about Australia. And there was something that he wrote that was just wrong. And I could see that no person who knew Australian history could possibly have written this rubbish. He was telling lies. And I slammed the book closed. I swore at him. I turned around and I threw his book in the garbage bin. I just had enough. Well, that didn't work out well for me because it turned out to be my wife's book and I had to get it out again. But I decided that whatever else I'm doing in life, it now stopped. I would now spend my time to sort out this mess that we call Australian history. And I was going to get into the original documents. In this book, for this book, I read more than 600 articles and books. I quote some 300, and half of those are more than 100 years old. I was after the original documents. The oldest document I got that affected your life, your country, your constitution, 1595. I know, eh? Not 16, 1595. I'll tell you about that if I get a chance in a minute. But when I actually looked at this, I thought, all right, I'm going to rewrite Australian history. If I'm going to do this, what's going to make my work different from all the other stuff that I've been looking at on the floor? And three things. Firstly is integrity. I don't need to make up stories. I don't need to tell lies or exaggerate. I have very good credentials from a very good university. And so when I write, it's my reputation in what I write. If I came across something I didn't like, I would take it on the chin. but it was going to go in as what actually happened. And I was going to find original, I wanted the diaries, I wanted the newspapers, I wanted to get into the logs of the ships, and I got into, I don't know how I pressed this button, but I got into the archives of the British Foreign Office. What this means is in there is all the ship's captain's logbooks, is all the memos of one person to another, all the letters and all the logs and the diaries and the reports. That's how I found the letter from Glenelg to Darling and a few others. So I'm in there swimming around in all of this incredible stuff. The second important thing was to chase the money trail. Nothing happens in politics that doesn't involve money. And when I went along to present my PhD dissertation like Noddy visiting big ears, I had this wonderful document in front of me, and I'm going to present it to the person that's looking after my dissertation. And he looked at it and he said, all right, you're going to rewrite the executive section of the Australian Constitution so that you might become a republic, because I was in a republic, America, at the time. And they thought it was a really novel idea to have a look at responsible government and Republican government. But he said to me, where's the money? And I took offence. This is the Australian Constitution. You know, we don't have money. He said, I don't care which country you come from, young fella, or what you think about your document. If it involves politics, it involves money. Go and find the money. And I did. Behind our Constitution. The third thing I wrote in the preface of what makes my book different is a thing that comes from my theological training called, it's a German phrase, it's Sitz in Leben, which means situation in life. It doesn't, we translate it, I suppose, as context, but it's more than context. So we talked about the context here. It's actually who are the people in the context? What are the influences upon them that brings this group to a point that they're going to make a decision? So it's that sort of wider sense in the German of what it is. So with those three things in my mind that I was looking for, I set out to actually have a really good look at our Australian history. And I became like a Sherlock Holmes of all of these incredible documents of the stuff I got. I got into the lounge room of the 6 men, and I think it's like October the 29th, 1787. 6. And these 5 men were in the lounge room of Prime Minister Pitt looking at the possible New South Wales venture. And there they were on a Saturday afternoon, the Parliament wasn't sitting, and I just heard one of them say, well, you know, we're going to have to do something about slavery. I mean, Wilberforce and Wesley are not going to be very happy with us if we don't do something to ban slavery. And another one said, well, you know, money is the root of all evils. We can't give them money. And I said, well, what are you going to do? Well, we'll have to give them land, of course. And if they take their families, give them more land and food and equipment. You know, we're starting up a settlement. Oh, yes. And as this afternoon went on and they got all excited, I thought these guys are designing Australia's first hippie commune. Have a listen to them. And another one said, oh, yes. He said, what a capital idea. We'll all go off to Australia. And I thought, there's the title of the book. What a capital idea. It was never, ever meant to be and wasn't a place of punishment. And here's the interesting thing with that 1595 date. This was the Elizabethan Act, or called the Poor Laws. And because there were such slums across England with the Industrial Revolution and people coming in, then we ended up with a lot of poor people that turned to theft in order to survive. And maybe you know the Oliver Twist story of the boy that asked for porridge twice, and he's in one of those homes in London. 96% of those children actually died in those homes. Not 60, 96% of them died. So they wrote legislation to try and relieve the problem. And the legislation is based on a Bible verse out of Ephesians 4:28. And it says, if he is a thief, let him be given labour or work that he might be transformed from his ways and help others. And that's what the legislation actually said. These thieves will be given labour, and we're going to get them out of the cities and away from the bad element, and we'll send them overseas, or we'll do something with them. And so they wrote this law in 1595. They revived it again in 1717, and again in 1774 under Lord Sydney. And so he knew the legislation to do with relieving the problem. Now, these people who came to court for what we'd call misdemeanor crimes were actually being sentenced under an incredible, strange thing called the benefit of clergy. It took me a while to sort of understand this, but originally it was when a clergyman came to court, and I had to think about that. Why would there be a clergyman in court, I suppose, driving under the influence on his donkey, drunk and disorderly, but whatever it was, there he was in court. And so he could actually say to the judge, benefit of clergy, and they'd send him off to the ecclesiastical court instead of the criminal court or the civil court. So this actually fell into common usage, and all the people that were caught stealing spoons or whatever it happened to be, or oranges, were then sentenced under this particular category called the benefit of clergy. The second interesting thing was that they were all then being sentenced and talked about as the property thereof. And what was happening is that when people were being sent to particularly America, they weren't just dumped off the boat. They were actually assigned to people to care for them. When it came to Australia, the caring of these people fell under the governor. And so he had responsibility for the what? For the care. So they had to have their own bed, somewhere to sleep, clothing, food. They could have some land to grow vegetables on. If they had wife, they got more property, and they could actually find other work. And they had Sundays off. Does that sound like punishment? No, it doesn't. And in fact, when I actually read the legislation, then it turned out that if you were between the ages of 15 and 25, you could volunteer to be transported. That doesn't sound like punishment, being sent to Australia by volunteering to be transported. And they were volunteering to be transported to America, the whole other story. I could go on and tell you about the gold rush and how this was the greatest gold rush in Australia in human history. 150 ships pulled into London in 1852, 150 ships from Australia laden with nothing but gold. And 40% of the world's gold was coming from this one place. And we became Britain's greatest commercial accident because they didn't think anyone was going to make a quid out of coming to Australia. And we returned 3 times, 300% more wealth to Britain than even Canada. We have lost a sense of the prosperity of this insane country. And so it goes on. I could talk about Arthur Phillip and how Arthur Phillip got on so well with the Aborigines that within 2 years they made him an elder, gave him the name Wallawarri, and the Aborigines moved into the colony. There wasn't a shot fired that killed an Aborigine in the first 27 years. And that was on purpose because there was a particular group of renegades that Lachlan Macquarie had to deal with. Not one. There wasn't any invasion, and there wasn't any, what's that other thing? There wasn't any slaughter of the Aborigines when they started this colony. So where did we get this from? We've been told lies and distortions of the truth that was making me angry with the story as it really was. And this is just the most amazing, incredible story, and I put it in this book. And I've had Jeffrey Blaney write and say to me, you know, he's been at this for 70 years or some other thing. He wrote and said, my goodness, he said, the research is absolutely incredible. I learned something. And he's asked me now, I'm writing something else. Remember the secret plan? I wrote that up and put it into what I'm writing now. And he wanted to read this stuff that's never been published before about a plan that went on behind coming to Australia that dealt with the French, brought on the French Revolution. And nobody in Australia has ever made the connection of what was taking place. So he's reading that for me now. But it's only a couple of months ago that His Majesty King Charles has written to me and thanked me for sending him a copy of the book. When Donald Trump said, I've just won this election, there were 3 men on the stage with him that have a copy of the book, which I had to laugh about. You know, that the book's getting around a bit. But this is the most, you think you know Australian history, you don't until you actually get the facts that you think you know sorted out. And you'll find this is the most amazing story. What I'm going to concentrate on for a few minutes is this story about how the Constitution was written. It's better than you think. I was standing there with Peter Cosgrove. You saw Peter's face come up. Well, I was in New South Wales Parliament and had a beer in my hand, and someone said, let me introduce you to Peter. Now, it's I always get his title. I've got to go. His Excellency, Sir General Peter Cosgrove, and more degrees or titles than I have. But there I was having a chat, and I said to Peter, tell me, I said, Peter, with a beer in my hand, mate, I said, how did you get on in being the Governor-General? Good question, you think, you know? Get a bit of personal response there. And he said, you know, I went off to America. I had to go to some funeral or something. And he said, you know, I couldn't represent Australia. There was nothing I could say as the Governor-General of this country, representing a country as an Australian. I said, well, mate, that office of the Governor-General has been reduced to being nothing but a cipher for quite some time. These days, I said, we'd call the office Mr. Autopen. So how did we get to this position where the Governor-General is Mr. Autopen? I've just got back this morning from Hobart, and it's a lovely little place. I'm filled with wonderful comedy stories of what happened to me, but there's a story about what happens and how it all starts in Hobart. There was this young man at 17 years old, and he worked in his father's foundry that was near the port of Hobart, and his name was Andrew. And Andrew had got to talk to the whalers, the American whalers that came in. And over the years, he picked up an interest in American politics, and the Civil War was on and just ended in 1867. Anyway, there was a blockade on the whaling ships and the oil, and, you know, as one part of America fought against another. But there was one ship, the Montgomery, with the Captain Charles Hamilton, that continued to come down into the southern waters and pulled into Hobart in October, just after the Civil War finished. And he sent word for Andrew to come and meet him in the pub. So Andrew and his older brother Henry got the message and ran to find Andrew and to bring him around to meet Charles, who's sitting in the pub. An old whaling captain that's sitting there, you know, and he's going to give some information to Andrew about what's been going on in the politics. And he's given him some writings by Jefferson, and he's given him a copy of the Federalist Papers, which you got to read. But there he was, meeting in the pub, and he's talking to him about American politics. Well, the pub that they met in was called, and is called, the Hope and Anchor. And when I gave a talk last night with the Archbishop of Tasmania sitting in the front row, you know, I was in the Hope and Anchor. And I couldn't believe that I was back in the very pub that where this boy's life started. And in that meeting with the sea captain, as he listened to politics, he decided that that's what he wanted to do, is become a politician, which meant that he had to become a lawyer. His father wasn't really happy about it, but nevertheless, he pursued the career. And 10 years later, he got past the bar, and he married a lady by the name of Grace Ross. And her parents had recently died and left her with this lovely home called Rosebank. And so when Andrew married Grace, he then put some money into it and made it even a bigger house. Well, it was Rosebank House, and I live in Rosebank House, in Rosebank Court, in Tallebudgera, in Queensland, and I couldn't believe it's the same address. So while I was in Tasmania, I took the time and I found the house yesterday, and I'm standing in front of the house where this fellow lived. But it was not just the fact that he lived there. He had meetings in this large lounge room that he had, they call a sitting room, and he started off with this club, the Minerva Club, and they were getting into philosophy and whatever, beautiful big library. And this group then would discuss the American politics, etc. Well, Andrew becomes a Republican, and he fully understands what democracy is. Well, Andrew becomes the Attorney General of Tasmania and goes off to the 1891 Constitutional Convention in Sydney. Fascinating thing happens, because what the background is, why did they bother to have constitutional convention? Well, there was this money problem. And Barclays Bank in England had gone under because they invested in Argentina and they just had a coup or something, and they needed bailing out. So the Bank of England put in money and borrowed it from other banks. Now, the other banks weren't really happy about this, but there was so much money invested in Australia, they then said, we want the money back. And in 1891, that year, in the next year, of the 28 banks in Australia, 19 went under. It was a major financial crisis. 19 banks went under. So it's in that context that the Premier of Queensland and a couple of others decided that if we federate, what we'll do is we'll take over national debt, and then we can push the Victorian massive debt, £250,000, through the national government. And if we're short on a bob, we could take it from the smaller states, and they could make up the difference to the British banks. So here was the agenda behind the Constitution. Well, what actually happens is that Andrew's just come back from America. I won't go into all of that, but he's got his head full of all of this. He's got a month to write something, get it typed. So while there's this convention just about to start, and you've got these premiers and whatever all sitting around, they're going to meet for a month. Can you imagine? I don't know if you've ever been to a conference that goes for 3 days. I can't stand it. I squirm around. A month of sitting in a conference, I couldn't stand it, but that's what they're going to do. Well, it starts off with Griffiths and the others, and they're all having a chat. And in walks the South Australian, Kingston. Oh, how are you, Charles? You know, sort of thing. It's, you know, we're all getting on and with this whole business of the Constitution. And how is that little state of yours getting on? What did you call the city? Oh, Adelaide. Yes, of course. You know, and it's only another, I don't know, 20 minutes to morning tea time. And we'll have a bit of a chat about what we're going to write about, of course. Well, into this meeting, Andrew walks in. Andrew walks into this meeting, and he's the young fella from Tasmania. You know, whatever thing good can ever come from Tasmania, but there they are. And Andrew walks in, and he walks up to this table, and he slaps this Constitution. There's a copy of the original typed Constitution from Andrew Clark, from 1891, and he slaps it on the table in front of these guys. And they start turning the pages and realise he's written it. Well, what are we going to do for the next 29 days in this conference if he's written it? Now, they're aware that they've got to go through it, because as long as it's protecting the money, you know, and while they're sort of going, he's written it, he says, and what about a name? Have you thought about a name? We're going to federate and become a nation. Have you thought about, and of course they hadn't. He said, well, what about the Commonwealth of Australia? And they said, what? Well, that's what England does. I mean, the Commonwealth of Virginia, the Commonwealth of Kentucky, and the Commonwealth of Philadelphia. England calls, you know, independent sorts of places Commonwealth. So why don't we call it the Commonwealth of Australia? Well, Park scratched his head. He can't think of a better reason why not. And while they're doing that, he opened his satchel, held up this old rag from the Anti-Transportation League in Tasmania, holds up this old rag, and he says, and what about this for a flag? The flag, the name, and 96 clauses in our Constitution comes from one man. And I'd never heard of him. how disgraceful is this? Who's teaching Australian history when we only have one founding father? And these other people, like Griffiths from Queensland, just put his name on the document. And I recently challenged these people and said, oh, Griffiths wrote the Constitution. And I said, give me a sentence that this fellow, Griffiths, Samuel Griffiths, wrote. And there isn't one. There isn't one. So these fellas with Griffiths and Barton and a Deacon from Victoria and a few others, the Easter long weekend comes. And Samuel Griffiths has come down on his boat from Queensland, the Lucinda or something. And he says, why don't we have a bit of a weekend away on the boat? But they don't invite Andrew and leave him in the hotel. Reports afterwards talk about how they had a weekend picnic. One wonders what the word picnic really meant. How much were they really drinking and having fun as they then got this document and, as Andrew said later, messed it up. What they did, you heard a little while ago, that the separation of powers, we think, is just the separation between the executive, the government, who runs the place. Think of Donald Trump as the president, whoever's the president, they run whoever's the government. The second aspect is the legislature. They write the laws, and the third is the judiciary. So Andrew wrote that constitution with that separation. On the boat, well, we have to do something and cut the legs off the Governor-General. So what we'll do is we'll change advise to demand with the executive officers. We'll tell the Governor-General what to do. Then we'll write in a clause that says all the executive officers that are telling the Governor-General to do shall be ministers of the Parliament. And that way he's not going to be able to do anything. And that's why Peter Cosgrove didn't have any power. They cut him off at the legs. Then the next thing these guys did was take out the whole section on the judiciary. Don't you worry about that. We'll look after that, said the Parliament. We'll decide who the judges are. She'll be right. And the third thing they did was then say, oh, well, when it comes to parliamentary practice and what we'll do, just put in a clause that said we leave it up to them. Well, what actually happens is, of course, they then, out of convention, Westminster Convention will have a Prime Minister. They'll have a Prime Minister. But it's not in the Constitution. The struggle for Andrew was between democracy, being a republic, and responsible government. You see, responsible government isn't democracy. Democracy is not just voting for a representative. The Chinese do that under communism. The Russians do that under communism. That's not democracy. What's democracy? Well, you get it in that American for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which is also the protection of property. And this comes from great political philosophers before that, like Locke and Hume and Spinoza, then the French contributors as well. There's a stack of information on this whole philosophical development based on the Christian principles that your life is valuable. You should have protection under the law for your life. You should have due process at a trial that judges whether you've committed a crime or not. There should be a difference between justice and just what the law says. So you get assessed. There should be a respect for life. You should have the right for self-determination. You should have the right to own property and develop your property. This is not communism. And you should have the right to pursue your own destiny, happiness. This is these fundamental Christian rights that becomes called democracy when we translate it into politics. So Andrew's got all of this in his head because he understands it, but responsible government is something else. Responsible government is we're all going to be sort of responsible to each other. And that is the Governor-General is going to be responsible to the monarch, and the monarch's going to be responsible to the Governor-General, the Viceroy. Now, you really will do what I tell you, sort of. Then the Governor-General is going to have a relationship, be responsible back to the Parliament. And the Parliament's going to be responsible back to the Governor-General. You can see it starts to get confusing, doesn't it? Well, does it sound democratic for you? What is in your constitution that's democratic? The only thing you can put your finger on is the term, representative government. We get to vote. Once you vote for the representatives, they're on their own. And when they cut out the judiciary and said, we'll look after that, Andrew Clark then fought over the next 10 years to get that third section of the Constitution back in, and he finally won. So we only have an independent judiciary today because Andrew himself, he wrote the whole thing, fought to get it back. Other than that, the Parliament would be telling even the judiciary when to come and go. So it becomes a problem as to what we should do with our Constitution. But the big thing, of course, is the banks wanted was the power of the Privy Council to make sure that none of the states got out of line with their bank payments. So the bit about the Privy Council that Andrew hated, where was independence in any of it? It wasn't meant to be. We were never meant to be independent. Responsible government, it was never meant to be independence. You know, if you go before the High Court of Australia and you stand there and you say, but it's not in the Constitution. I've got rights in the Constitution. The answer is, and the court says, no, you don't. There's not one sentence in the Constitution that gives you a right whatsoever. Please put that document away. It's no good in this room. And that's the truth. Yet, when it comes to this is an original copy of our Constitution. Remember me, I like original documents. This starts off with, whereas the people of these states do federate. And so it goes on that our federation was with states. And the separation of powers is not just among those three elements, which is, of course, terribly Republican and American. It's also the separation of powers between the federal government and the state government, and they wrote that in. But there are so many things now that are not there. Now, I mentioned the fact that in our Constitution, there is no such position as a Prime Minister. There is no such position as a cabinet, and there's no such thing as a party. Yet these three elements are running your country, and they are constitutionally illegitimate. And when a Prime Minister decides that he's going to ask the other premiers to get together and go kumbaya and form a national cabinet, it is totally constitutionally illegitimate. How can somebody in a premier in a state give up their right and the right to be a separated unit within this country and say, I'm just going along to a national cabinet, and let the Prime Minister and the civil service tell me what I ought to be doing? And when a Prime Minister, as you heard, can say, I think I want to be the Minister for everything while nobody's looking, you start to realise that our position is our Prime Minister has become an autocrat. It doesn't matter who is in, they have this insane power. Our Prime Minister has more power than a king or a president. So our Prime Minister, whoever they were, happens to be on a plane going off to a UN meeting, and he decides, I think Australia ought to support a Palestinian state. And if you keep up with the news, mate, you'd see that America's already got this little group together and they're going to turn Palestine into a Las Vegas, and they're already putting up a bunch of hotels. I mean, what's the Palestinian state? The Palestinian State Hotel on the corner of whatever, Donald Trump Street and whoever else. I mean, you know, what's the Palestinian state in Las Vegas? I mean, and we're not even on the page. Or I think everybody under the age of 16 shouldn't be allowed on the internet. What? Where do we get to say this? So the power that's in that position that is unconstitutional is totally unbearable. And yet there are clauses in this document, as nice as it was when it was written, that just don't serve us anymore. Clause 58, good one. It says that if the legislature, national legislature, writes something that the Governor-General doesn't like, he can send it on to the Queen, the monarch. And she has got 2 years to decide whether she likes it or not. That's 58. And I just imagined Her Majesty getting on the phone and saying, I really don't think what you're doing is right. This week I opened up my red box and there was a piece of legislation and you have been very naughty boys and you're going to stop it. Riding on the sheep's back has got to stop. I mean, it was nonsense, but that's in the Constitution that says the monarch has 2 years to make a decision on our legislation. Now, maybe it worked in the first few years, but it's time we fix this document. I'm sick to death of the Coles and Woolworths oligarchy that goes on between the two parties. Well, you can be in government and everything you say, I won't like. And then when I get in government, you can be the opposition and you can say you don't like anything that I do. So we've got this conflict model. Where's the leadership? Where's the vision? Where's Lachlan Macquarie that says, I'm going to make this a prosperous country? And the population grew by 300% in 10 years. Can you try to imagine our population going from 25 million to 75 million in 10 years? If we don't become net zero in the meantime, you know, I mean, you know, which is going to come first? I mean, it's unimaginable. Where would the kids buy a home? We're going to do about the roads, the sewage system, but you know, it's insane. The growth that went on in that time was because there was a model of prosperity, and we've lost our sense of vision, and we don't have the leadership that we need. When I hear that just a month ago in South Australia, where they had election, 160,000 people, registered voters, didn't show up to vote. And another 50,000 put crosses and whatever else, donkey votes. That's 200,000 people walked away from their right. You only got to tick a box. From their right to vote for this country. There is a whole disillusionment with government. I was on a podcast last week, I was listening to this fella telling me this, and I flicked back to him something that I think is like a mirror, and I said, I don't think the people of this country, I don't think they have the government, they don't like the government that we have, and we don't have the government that we need. We don't like the government system that we have, and we don't have a democratic form of government to represent us today. When I hear that the greatest cause of death for under 34-year-old males in this country is now suicide, I don't know what to do with that. I mean, you've got this the greatest country, the land of the long weekend, and there's such depression and hopelessness that it's the greatest cause of death in Australia for men is suicide. What has happened? You know, we've walked away from our Christian base and we think we're so modern that we're so secular, but where are the values? What have we done but hold up our foot and shoot ourselves when it comes to where is the base when we hear what's going on? Now, what's actually happened is we are now vulnerable to the rubbish that gets thrown to us. We have marches on the street of how many thousands of people protesting against Australia Day? I mean, what is the matter with this country? We are vulnerable to the slings and arrows and the rubbish that gets thrown at us because we don't know our history. You stand on the shoulders of incredible people of faith and hope who had a vision for a great nation. Your children are going to stand on your shoulders. If you don't know your history and if we're not proud of our country, what are we passing on to them? I wrote this book because it needed to be written. I couldn't stand the rubbish about our history, and I can't stand people running it down. But I've now got my head so full of it, I mean, you can come and ask me anything, and I'm so determined to help us find the pride in this great country. But I'm also determined it's about time we became a democracy, because there's, whatever it is, we can't continue with this thing called responsible government where they've already cut off the monarch. We've got a King of Australia. He's great. I mean, I really like Charles, King Charles. I told you he sent a lovely letter to me about my book, I told you that, didn't I? Yeah. I really like the British history. And in fact, a academic out of Melbourne made a mistake in the preface. It was a bit of a liberal book, but he hit this point and he said in the preface, if we deny our British history, we will become a people without a soul. And that is what is happening. We are losing the very soul of the nation. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to find a future, a vision, and we have to know what it is that made this country great. While I think we need to become a democracy, I do. I have to still say I have such respect. I will finish this with saying, God save the King. And, may he all but help us become the great country that we should be. Thank you very much.
First of all, I've got a question for Katy. Do toxins leach into farmland from solar panels? And if so, can the farmland be restored?
Okay, thank you. That's a really good question. So I've spoken directly with Ian Clymer and Peter Ridd about that issue. So Ian is certain that yes, they do, and he says that openly when he does speaking to us. I had Dr. Peter Ridd come and look at the solar farm that I showed you guys earlier on today, and he said that it's quite possible that there is cadmium, lead, tellurium leaching out of those panels. But because nobody's doing any proper testing of the groundwater or the soil, we actually don't have any results to judge that off. There was one solar farm outside of Mudgee where they did some soil testing and they found some lead in that soil. But what it requires base level to be done before the solar farm's conducted, and that's not being done. So it needs to be made a regulatory requirement. If you're going to build a solar farm, as far as I'm concerned, they shouldn't be getting built anyway. But if it's going to be built, there should be extensive testing of the groundwater and the soil done beforehand. We don't have anything conclusive. But for me personally, it's enough for me to say that I wouldn't want to eat the food that comes out of the soil that's grown there later on in life. And no, I don't believe that you could repatriate 3,000 acres of contaminated soil, because how are you going to do that?
Thanks. This one's for Mark. Can you hear me through this?
Yeah.
Mark, what can we do at a local level to take our freedoms back?
I don't know, but all it means is we've got to stand up. You can't just keep doing what you're told. And that's, I forget what they call it. It's basically, if you've got bad laws, don't obey one. Like get the jab. No, I'm not getting the jab. If we had at the time stood up as a community or a country and said we're not doing it, they couldn't have forced it. The country would have shut down if we didn't go. But because everyone just followed it and kept getting the jab, it made it easy for them to keep pushing it. So the only way to do it is en masse say no, we're not doing it, and stand by that commitment. And if they're going to torture you, make it hard for you, a little bit of pain now is going to be a lot better than watching your grandkids and whatever suffer their whole life when we just don't stand up because, oh, we can't go to the club for a day or we can't do this. There's certain things that are more important than going to the club and whatever. We have to stand up and let the government know we're serious. Otherwise, if you fold like we did and believe their propaganda, they just keep doing it. So that's the only way I can see that you have to do it. We have to say no, feel a bit of pain, but make them feel a lot more.
Just quickly, one of the things Australians for Better Government advocates for is citizens-initiated referenda, which I think most people kind of understand. This is one thing that we haven't advocated for, but I think we need to talk about it internally first at ABG. And John Ruddick proposed this at one of our former meetings, is citizens-initiated veto, where citizens can say, no, we don't like that law, we want it vetoed or repealed. So we need those accountability mechanisms built into our system. So these politicians just can't keep pushing. Yep.
Could you make some of those type of laws voluntary? Like if I want to get to jail by Katy, if you don't want to, you don't have to. Could there be something? Well, that's what they reckon it was.
That's what they say. That Morrison said we're not forcing it on anyone, but everyone was forced into it. So, yeah.
So it was only if you wanted to go to anywhere except your back room.
And if you wanted to feed your children, you know.
Because their corporate partners work with them and says, well, the government's not making you do it, but we're going to do it as a matter of safety for the community. We feel you need to have it, otherwise you can't come to our workplace.
But we're not forcing you.
But we're not forcing you. You can stay at home and go broke and eat cockroaches if you want. But so they didn't make you do it, but they made you do it.
And put people into a state of fear with the fear-mongering.
You couldn't even get a job. They'd stop you working. You couldn't go to work if you didn't have the job.
Yeah, and that's what I said. If everyone at the start had said no, they would have been in trouble. But because people just kept going and kept going out of fear, and in the end it wasn't fear of COVID, because you all know that was a hoax. It was fear of actually being locked out of society.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's all they were doing, locking you out of society. So we just have to say, no, we're not going to play your game anymore, and be committed to it, and not just fold the minute you think, oh, I better get whatever it is they're forcing on you because I need to feed the kids or I need to do this. And the more people didn't do it, like you work together to help each other get through it. So you would create a community, as we have here, of people that supported each other through that rubbish. And then the community would grow and the government would actually suffer more because communities would be fighting against them. So it's just, we have to stick together.
I believe was a lot of coercion by the government. So my own personal story around I actually got the jab twice. Like, I didn't need to. I had that false green tick thing, so I could go out anywhere. But because the Queensland government was saying, when we get to 80% vaccination rate, we'll open everything up. So I'm watching people, well, I didn't know Katy at that time, but I imagine she was probably doing a bit tough with her cafe with people not being able to go and all businesses folding. So I decided to do it as I thought, you know, that was my civic duty to help the rest of the community. And obviously I fully regret that. And unfortunately, nothing's happened to me health-wise.
And I think also their media campaign was so bad, and so every day 11 o'clock you had the Muppets standing there telling us another 4 cases today. Yeah. We're at 14%. Next day we're at 15%. So they kept just, and the people in the past have had governments you could trust. But I think now we all realise we don't have a government we can trust. So now if they tell you to go to the left, you go to the right. So whatever they're telling you to do, you do the exact opposite because you know you can't trust them.
Okay.
Martin, can I have a talk?
Yeah.
Look, my mother was in aged care when that came out, but I couldn't go and see her because I hadn't had the jab. But I could pick her up and take her out and bring her back. So what that one is.
Inconsistencies. Okay, this one's one for Stephen. Will a true separation of powers give us effective checks and balances, or do we need to consider a better system of oversight?
Look, no system's perfect, and look, I guess the answer to the question is in the name. Australians for better government, not Australians for perfect government, because we're dealing with human nature here, and it's hard to protect against human nature, but we want to protect against human nature as best as we can. So I do think if we were to go to a more separation of power system, that it would build in accountability into the system, at least more accountability than we have now. So let's get to that point first, and then we can look at the system again and always try to continually improve the system. All the proposals that we have at Australians for Better Government, if we swept those in tomorrow and got them all in there, it wouldn't mean that Australians for Better Government would finish. We would have to continue to keep revising the system, because the Constitution and our system should be a revolving, fluid document where we're always reviewing it and seeing if it works, because something that works now might not work in 10, 20, 30 years. So we always continually have to look at our system and continually trying to adapt it to our circumstances.
One for Dr. Chris. Do you think America has a better system of government than Australia?
Yes. Now, what you see at the moment, because the media fans it along, is you see conflict between the White House, the executive, and the legislature, and at the moment, like never before, the court. But that conflict is healthy. That is the separation of powers. That is the, what's the other term you just used? Checks and balances. So that you don't have one person just running the country. Remember that their whole system was set up against the tyranny of government. They're allowed to carry guns, not against so much the king, but a tyrannical government. So that's in the psyche, that people have rights. And we, under responsible government, it is not a democratic, never was meant to be a democratic system. So while we may, and we can see that there's people that have got agendas that are getting into the court or constantly complaining or whatever else, the system as such, where you've got one person running, as it were, with experts running the government, and a legislature that just does the laws, and a judiciary that's got the power to review, is as good as we've ever seen, where we do actually have a system of review and checks and balances. So with our system, there isn't any checks and there isn't any balances. Our Prime Minister, just whoever they happens to be, as I said, has more power than a president or a king. No.
Scary stuff. One for Katy. This one's about Wellington solar farms. And I think the gist of it, it's a long one, I think the gist of it is about the offers that all energy, is it? All energy? I can't read it, sorry. It's something else.
All AUL.
Oh,
you mean the company? Sorry.
The company, yeah. It's about the energy company, what they're doing with the selling or leasing the land. Is that what you meant about that?
No, the question is more related to, if you don't mind, it's more related to the people who own the land. So if someone decides they want to sell their land to an energy company or lease their land to an energy company, when you talk about, we shouldn't build them or we shouldn't do it, or it's farmland, grazing land, destroying the environment, I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but if someone's approached to sell their land or lease their land, money talks. So how can you stop people saying, okay, I've been offered, I'll make up figure $5 million for 100 acres, and maybe the person who owns the land thinks that, well, I can make more money out of having a solar farm there than I can out of traditional farming. I'm not saying one is right or wrong, but how can you stop a solar farm because the person who owns the land or wants to lease it?
Yeah, absolutely.
You can't stop them from doing that.
Yeah, you're right. You're actually right. If you're a libertarian, you would say, yes, they should be allowed to sell their land and it should be used for whatever purpose it gets sold for. And I understand that. But the fact of the matter is that in Australia, we have environmental laws that control primary production, aquaculture, mining, every other industry, but we don't have any laws that control the toxins or the damage to the environment that these renewable energy projects do. So tomorrow, if the government decided to change the environmental acts in each of the states and territories and include renewable energy in our environmental acts, the same as it includes all the types of primary production, mining, these projects would cease immediately. It's that simple. Because they don't fulfil any of the same requirements or regulatory requirements that the other industries do. So that's the first issue. There's not much we can do about this, but the second issue is the fact that we've actually allowed our farmers to be shit on for so long that they don't want to farm anymore. That's a fact. So it is so hard from a regulatory perspective to farm these days. Up in Queensland, I've got a mate, Jim, who I spoke about earlier today. I think he says that there's 72 instruments of legislation that a farmer has to think about before he even touches the ground and turns it to grow something. That's ridiculous. So we have made an environment, not us, we have allowed an environment, we've allowed the government to make an environment that makes it so hard to farm that when BP Lightsource comes along and says, we'll give you $5 million, and yes, they just walk away. But there's no laws surrounding setbacks. Here in the city, you would have to go and get a DA to build a high-rise building next to this building right here. And it's likely that you wouldn't get it because it wouldn't fit the aesthetic of this suburb. But at the moment, there's no law stopping the local council up where I am from saying, yes, you can build that solar farm, and it doesn't matter that this person next door has a house that's only 20 metres off the boundary and you're going to destroy their life. So there is that whole United Nations influence that's being pushed down the pipeline. It's being pushed down so quickly and into every single facet of our lives, and there's no regulations controlling it because we've got a government who's got a woke agenda to take over the country and do what they want with it. So they're not taking their time, they're not thinking it through. But I completely understand what you're saying, and yes, you are right.
Okay, everyone, thank you for today. Thank you for coming. Thank you for giving up your Saturday. Thank you to our great speakers. Thank you to Martin for allowing us to host this event here, and thank you for the venue. And also thank you to Dr. Reynolds and to Katy for coming down. And please support Dr. Reynolds by getting his book. Thank you.